taking action into your consciousness by tuning in to Contact Talk Radio.
And on tunein.com, Hing.fm, and UpSnap Mobile.
Contact Talk Radio.
Welcome to What the Health, an independent approach to your health span. Have you noticed how our healthcare system may not have your best interest in mind? Join Dr. Eckel in this fun and sometimes disturbing exploration of the state of healthcare and what it means for you. Now, here's your host, Dr. Eckel.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. And this is What the Health. And once again, I've got one of my favorites on the show, Dr. Greg Nigh. And we are going to talk about his book, The Devil in the Garlic, and how sulfur in your food can cause anxiety, hot flashes, IBS, brain fog, migraines, skin problems, and a whole plethora more symptoms. And this may be one of those hidden problems out there that if you've got some chronic illness. Let me give you a little bit of Dr. Nye's background. So one, he's a co-founder of Nature Cures Clinic, where I'm continuing to practice. He moved across town over to Immersion Health and specializing in oncology and difficult recalcitrant conditions. He's been a prominent voice within the naturopathic profession for over 2 decades, several times speaking at the annual convention, the American Association of Naturopathic Physicians. He's a big speaker on oncology as well, at the Oncology Association of Naturopathic Physicians. He's got twice conferences on the physics, chemistry, and biology of water, which is totally fascinating, in Bulgaria. He's educated researchers from around the world of unique role of sulfur in the maintenance of water structure, which we're going to get into today. In addition to his work with cancer patients, he also works extensively with Lyme disease, mold toxicity, related illnesses, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, gastrointestinal symptoms, including inflammatory bowel disease, and many other challenging conditions. He's one of the top minds that I have found in the field, and I so enjoy speaking with him. So welcome aboard, Dr. Greg.
Thank you so much for having me back. I love it. Yeah.
Yes. Well, I wanted to talk about your book because, I had you on earlier last year and was really kind of got sideswiped by the pandemic. And, it's one of those things, the virus that won't go away. But this book is very important. I know that you have been really researching sulfur greater than a decade and have really putting out some amazing work around it, sulfur metabolism, and then this whole array of potential causes of illness in the body. So, I guess one I want to start out with is like, what's the big deal about sulfur?
Yeah, maybe I've made too big of a deal about it. No, I'm just kidding. It is a big deal. So the big deal about sulfur is that, well, first of all, it is, we have to have sulfur. The point of the book is not that we need to stay away from sulfur. Sulfur is crucial for so many aspects of physiology. One of the most important being that it has to get converted into sulfate. We don't eat sulfate dietarily. We get a little bit maybe in our water if you're drinking well water, but sulfate is not a dietary thing. We have to make sulfate because sulfate is used. Many of the hormones are getting sulfated. Our connective tissue is all sulfated. There's so much use of sulfate. And so the big deal about sulfur is that if we are not able to make sulfate in the normal way that should happen, either we die or our body has to find another way to get to it. And when the body does that other way, it causes symptoms, which is unfortunate, but it's maybe a better than dying choice. And so the body will go in that direction to compensate, to create the sulfate in the way that it needs to. And so, it's like the whole kind of problem of sulfur evolves from that compensation that the body goes into. Yeah.
How did you start down this rabbit hole? Like, how did you put it together that maybe sulfur metabolism, right? Because this is the third highest concentration element in our bodies, right? And like, how did you put this together? Like, in the mind of Dr. Greg Nigh, when was the light bulb to say, let me look at this?
I'm not real sure. And I thought I could credit having read a paper by Stephanie Seneff as the first thing. But when I went back and looked into my archives, actually, I had contacted Maria and said, I'm hoping that she can put together a low sulfur diet. And I had communicated that to Maria before I had any connection to Stephanie. So I don't know where I came up with it. I think it was, I used to do a lot of the elimination diet at Nature Cures, did a lot of elimination diet with people. And I think it was starting to see a pattern of, because some people, like, you just can't figure out why they're not getting better doing the elimination diet. And it just seemed like there was this pattern of the kind of reactions that were coming up. And so I had reached out to Maria to see if she could try that diet. And then when I read Stephanie's paper, that first paper of hers that I had read, it was like, oh, my mercy. And that just kind of led into a lot of, then she and I had a few conversations on the phone, and kind of then it ballooned. And then the real kind of the final thing was Maria realizing that people doing GAPS, that there were people doing the GAPS program. Many of them do great, but some of them don't do well at all. And GAPS is a very high sulfur diet. And so then it was trying low sulfur on those people who were failing GAPS, and it's like, whoa.
Interesting. So, and that's Maria Zilka, who you work in tandem with, and with an amazing nutritionist out there. So that component of really seeing the patterns in patients and seeing some diets that weren't working, and then this kind of opened it up. Would you say, I guess, so what is the plethora, like, how is it involved with, it seems like that litany is very, different systems get involved. And you're saying the sulfur metabolism, there's a fine line, right? Because you can have too much or too little sulfur. The connection with Stephanie Seneff, for those that don't know, because you guys are publishing some amazing stuff around the vaccine and around coronavirus, in addition to glyphosate and toxicity, and basically the effects on sulfur metabolism. So before we get into what goes wrong with sulfur metabolism, let's just talk about that connection, or some of those early papers, are for folks that don't know who she is.
Sure. So I get sort of the context around that. So Stephanie, in many ways, I really think of my clinical work as just sort of the clinical application of the ideas that Stephanie has developed, because she's a researcher, and so that's been a lot of fun for me to be able to take those ideas and really be working with her and developing some of that stuff, and then like, okay, how does that translate over into the clinic? Because these are, this is real physiology, and how does this manifest for patients? So Stephanie, one of the things that I really appreciate about Stephanie is that she has a very, very naturopathic way of thinking about pathology, and really understanding pathology through the lens of adaptation, and that we come into our various maladies by the body trying to compensate in some way. And of course, in the naturopathic world, that's like, well, sure, but that's, in a way, I think Stephanie even outdoes us, because she, she wrote a whole paper on the plaques that are building up in arteries are really trying to supply sulfate to the local tissue. They are these little sulfate factories that, anyway, so like, to understanding, like, even a plaque in an artery could be a compensation. Or, she first keyed me into the idea that cancer could be an adaptive process. And that's one that I have done my own kind of exploration and talking about and stuff. So she has this very adaptationist model for whatever she's looking at. She's looking at it through the lens of adaptation, which I really appreciate that. And so what she came to understand was this amazingly delicate balance of sulfate and nitrate in the body, and the various assaults that happen. You know, glyphosate in many ways is it's like if a team of scientists got together to try to figure out how to interfere with sulfate metabolism. That's what you would come up with. It's perfect. It does it in so many ways. And so then what she has done a lot of, and she and I have collaborated then on some of, is looking at, okay, what is going to happen in all these different areas if you insert glyphosate, let it do what it does to the various enzymes, and then what are the consequences? So, you know, she looked at it, how it's related to irritable bowel, and how I was on a paper where we looked at gout and related diseases. We wrote a paper about anencephaly, you know, that affects kids, especially of migrant, you know, anyway. How these various exposures to glyphosate are going to manifest physiologically. And then was this awareness that, so that was looking at sulfate. And then kind of what got incorporated in, because it is crucial, is the role of sulfate in structuring the water in the body. And so this is really building on the work of Jerry Pollack at University of Washington, and this process that happens, this phenomenon of in the body, all of the water, not all of it, but most of the water in the body is in a structured form, and sulfate is essential as the template that allows for that structuring. And again, Stephanie and I wrote a paper on this, which I think is the first paper that offered an explanation for why water has this unique form. It's been known, you know, it has been called interfacial water, which is the water at the interface between, like, where water meets proteins. It takes on this unique characteristic, which has been widely recognized, but nobody knew why or how. And so in the paper that we did, we kind of offered an explanation for that, and then what the physiological consequences are in a number of ways, and how glyphosate just wrecks that. Because if you interfere with sulfate production, one of the ways that ricochets on is that it interferes with water structure. And once you've interfered with water structuring, it really breaks down everything about how the mitochondria is trying to do what it's doing. And so that has been sort of the model of understanding all kinds of things. And even right now, you know, we're kind of in this frenzy of back and forth about the impact of not only potential infection with coronavirus, but also of the vaccination and the lipid nanoparticles and all of that, and how it then is coming into this system that is exquisitely designed. The sulfur, water, nitrate balance, everything needs to be in balance for it all to work right. And then, you know, you come into that with something like a positively charged lipid, and it wreaks havoc, or potentially could wreak havoc. So
it's something to really
anyway,
be considered. I want to get back. I want to get into that as well, but I think that's an important piece to understand on, you know, what does sulfur have to do with it and the sulfur metabolism. So and how it can be so disparate, all of these different symptoms being related to this sulfur.
Oh yeah, I forgot to address that, didn't I?
No, that's okay. That's why I'm here. That's what I'm doing here.
So the thing is, If the correct pathway for producing sulfate from dietary sulfur, if that pathway gets interfered with, the body's got to figure something else out. And it has a very easy kind of workaround that it can do. All we need is to grow what are called sulfur fixing bacteria in the gut, because then dietary sulfur comes in, and instead of the enzymes in the gut wall or over in the liver making the sulfate, we have bacteria that will take dietary sulfur and create two compounds, predominantly hydrogen sulfide and sulfite. Now, those are very symptomatic compounds. There's a wide body of literature on the symptoms associated with both of those. A lot of people know, sulfite gives me a headache, or sulfite, causes anxiety or something. Hydrogen sulfide, people aren't as familiar with, but hydrogen sulfide is a gasotransmitter. So it is in the same class as a neurotransmitter, which we all know, serotonin, dopamine. But this is a gas that acts as a neurotransmitter. As a neurotransmitter, it helps with concentration and with memory formation. It dilates blood vessels. It helps to regulate the heart rate. It has this wide range of effects in the body. And as with anything, it's all about the balance. If you have too little or too much of it around, there's going to be a problem. And so a common manifestation of a sulfur dysregulation is that people start to get, their gut doesn't feel well, anywhere from more gurgly than they should to bloated all the time, or the inflammatory bowel diseases, whether it's Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, or maybe irritable bowel. All of those, and the literature on them, are associated with excess production of hydrogen sulfide in the gut. And so we have this production of hydrogen sulfide. It is a gas that will obviously can cause gas and also diffuse directly into the blood. It doesn't need any kind of transport to get to the blood. And once it's in circulation, it is associated with, that's why it has this long list of possible symptoms, because it can cause dermatitis in the skin, it can cause joint pain, certainly can cause headaches, brain fog, just that cloudy thinking, hot flashes and temperature dysregulation, usually in the hot direction. So all of those are, it's like it can touch all of those different systems, and it's almost too good to be true. But if you can correct it at the level of the sulfate production, then all these other symptoms resolve on their own, because you don't have to go after each individual system that's out of balance. You just correct the underlying, and it's this lovely sort of a, one plan fits all problems.
Sure.
Now, of course.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, just to say, with any given person who presents with this set of symptoms and others, it's not true that you fix their sulfur and you fixed everything. Almost always people have sulfur and something else going on, sulfur and they have an oxalate problem as well, or sulfur and they have a histamine problem as well, or sulfur and they've just got heavy metals, or they're B12 deficient. Getting rid of a sulfur problem doesn't fix a B12 problem. So it's not as though everything, is fixed with a sulfur, program.
Yeah.
But I always start there, because if you can clear those symptoms out of the way, and it makes it much, the other problems, it become more clear as to what they are.
How prevalent is it? Because this is not taught in medical school. Western medicine, I don't think, even pays attention to this. And really, You've been and Maria have been main educators in the naturopathic alternative realm. How prevalent are you seeing this clinically?
Yeah, not it is true. Not many docs are tuned into it, which is great job security for me.
Right.
As a problem, I think it is very, very widespread. I think there are many people who have sulfur dysregulation to some extent. They have no idea. And these are not the kinds of foods that people are thinking, everybody's thinking, maybe I shouldn't eat dairy, or maybe I shouldn't eat gluten, but nobody's thinking, maybe I shouldn't eat garlic.
Yeah.
These are the healthy foods, and they are healthy. There's nothing inherently wrong with the sulfur containing foods. In fact, they're very healthy foods. It's just if we can't metabolize the sulfur, then they are symptom causing.
Got it.
So I think of all people with chronic illness, I would wager that 80% of them would have somewhere between modest to dramatic improvement in their symptoms if they got this thing taken care of.
Interesting. Is SIBO in a continuum on this sulfur metabolism?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Sorry. I gotta plug my computer in. I'm just seeing. So SIBO, that was a funny just development in my clinical path, because I was working on sulfur with Maria, kind of other patients, and then the SIBO patients started showing up. I didn't know anything about SIBO. I hadn't, really read about it, or I knew of it, but I didn't know how to diagnose it or anything. And they would come in with these tests that, I'm high hydrogen or whatever, and I just did I would just have them do the sulfur protocol, because I didn't know what else to do.
Yeah. And
it was shocking how many times it would bring about a really significant improvement in how they were feeling. It didn't matter what their test result was, if they would just do the sulfur thing. Now, since then, having looked at this a little more, I think it makes sense. I do think that sulfur is actually underlying most SIBO, whatever hydrogen or methane. I think there is an underlying sulfur issue in most of that. And I also think that we can look at hydrogen and methane as something other than these sort of gut pollutants that, hydrogen is one of the strongest antioxidants in that the body can have. It's a very strong antioxidant. Methane has its own potential. There has been a proposal that we should be considering methane as a gasotransmitter as well, because of the potential effect, the effects that it has. So I think we can reinterpret all of that as in some ways adaptive. And if we do that, it just so changes the way we are then going to think about treating it.
Yeah.
Because, for instance, with SIBO, I do not do very much bug killing. And even in the naturopathic world, that's a main focus. What are the herbs that you can use to antimicrobialize this person, or rifaximin or whatever. And I'm not dissing. Some people are, people are miserable and they're looking to get out of symptoms, and those things can absolutely help people become more functional. But my experience, and maybe it's just because I have a biased sample of patients around this, but that when the approach is to kill bugs, it will not be a long-lasting solution. That symptoms are going to return. And it never made sense to me that somebody can kill the bugs that need to be killed, take all the best probiotics and eat the diet they're supposed to eat, meditate and do all the right things, and the symptoms come back. It doesn't. How would that be? How could that happen? Why would the body so want to have those bugs there? And that is actually one of the first clues around when I started just dealing with SIBO more. That was the first clue that this has got to be an adaptation. It has to be. The body is not going to let those bugs go away until the problem is fixed. And for those interested, if you haven't seen it, I wrote an article just about that very idea. The SIBO is an adaptation. It's in the Naturopathic, Naturopathic Doctors News and Reviews.
Oh, and DNR. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, Indian.
Great.
Yeah.
And that's searchable online. That's awesome. So that this whole adaptive component, I want to get back to that. I want to get back into some of the coronavirus and vaccine discussions on what happens with sulfur metabolism. But you had mentioned this easy zone, the exclusionary zone of water, and how important sulfur is, or sulfate is, in creating, a negative charge around the cell and creating ourselves as like walking batteries of water, which I think is really underpinning why we see so many people talking about structured water and, obviously being well hydrated, but it's not, if the batteries aren't set up, that our mitochondria, it's implicated with mitochondrial dysfunction. And then you get the longevity researchers talking about NAD and mitochondria. But really, ultimately, if you take a more of a meta approach of, well, actually, all of those maladaptive phases of the body's just creating those symptoms to say, pay attention to me, we're out of balance. This may be one of the largest components for health of our system. I mean, would you agree to that statement?
Yeah. I think so, all right, this might get a little bit boring, but just stick with me.
Okay.
So sulfate is needed to provide the negative charge that structures water within the body. That structured water, I believe, is trapping deuterium. Deuterium is heavy hydrogen. It's hydrogen, which has a neutron in the nucleus, which normal hydrogen just has a proton. So there's just a proton and electron. That's hydrogen. Deuterium, proton, neutron, electron. Deuterium is twice as heavy as normal hydrogen is. All the water that we drink, we pour it out of a tap and we drink it, all of it has deuterium in it at about 155 parts per million average. Deuterium is a nightmare for biology. It clogs up any kind of system that it gets into. So hydrogens are getting used to build molecules and build DNA and go through the ATPase pump in order to make ATP, hydrogen. But deuterium is coming in as well. The body has to make sure that deuterium does not get used, doesn't make its way to the mitochondria, because then it'll clog that pump. If deuterium goes down the ATPase chute, it clogs the chute. So you can't make more ATP there. If deuterium gets incorporated into DNA construction, it makes the DNA way more prone to mutations. If it gets incorporated into other organic molecules, the point here, obviously, is that you can't let deuterium, the hydrogens, the deuterium that's coming in on the water molecules. So about 1 in every 3,500 H2O molecules is actually HDO. There's one deuterium stuck on there. When we drink water, those hydrogens on the water get harvested to be used in the various ways that hydrogen needs to be used. You can't let deuterium get harvested. It's got to be tucked away. That's all a big introduction to the structuring of water. When you form the structured layer, the EZ, that happens on the outside of cells, happens around all the cell organelles, around proteins, any negative charge is going to offer itself for structuring. That structured layer will entrap HDO. so that it holds the deuterium in place. And in doing that, hydrogen, when you build that structured layer, because hydrogens are getting shared among the molecules, it liberates hydrogen. It does not liberate deuterium. That's how deuterium gets trapped, because the bond between oxygen and deuterium is significantly stronger than the bond between hydrogen and oxygen. So as that is forming, hydrogens are getting shared. There are now an excess of hydrogens that are getting plucked off and sent outside of the structured layer, and those will get wicked away to the mitochondria, so that only hydrogen is making its way to the mitochondria. So the problem is, if you mess up the structuring of water, then you're liberating deuterium. It's no longer trapped, and it now can be, those deuterium can now get harvested and utilized in all kinds of ways that they were never supposed to be. So it's this tight relationship between the constant need for sulfate to supply the negative charge. That sulfate has to make its way into the construction of glycosaminoglycans, proteoglycans, collagen. You know, all of our collagen is sulfated. And that then allows the water that we're drinking with deuterium in it to get adequately, that deuterium gets adequately trapped. And you're absolutely right that when that layer is forming, then hydrogens are getting exported out, as we just talked about, because they're sharing, the molecules share hydrogen. So you have an excess of hydrogen. The hydrogen builds up on the exterior. So you build up the structured layer, and at some point it stops, and here's the liquid layer. Hydrogens accumulate right there. So now you've exported hydrogen from here. Now that means this is a negative charge, and you've accumulated hydrogen here. That's a positive charge, and you separate charges, and that's a battery. Yeah. And that battery is getting utilized in the body. It's usable energy. That's been published. So as our body water increases in the structure, in the thickness of that easy layer, it is literally charging our battery. It is usable energy. And this is why infrared saunas are so important, because as Jerry has figured out, it's actually in there's near infrared and far infrared, and then there's mid infrared, and it's actually in the mid infrared where the greatest thickening, if you shine those, that frequency or wavelength on, if you create in a lab, EZ, you take a negative charge, you just pour water on it, it'll have an EZ. If you then radiate that with that kind of infrared, it will thicken the layer of structured water by up to 1,000 times.
Wow.
So when we take a walk in the sunshine, we sit in an infrared sauna, we are literally thickening the structured layer and charging a battery.
Wow. I love it. That sounds so naturopathic right there.
Yeah, it is. It is perfectly so. Okay. And we are doing our cells, our mitochondria, a favor, because as that layer builds, we're entrapping more and more deuterium, which means that the mitochondria are getting more and more hydrogen.
Got it.
So, yeah.
So one question on that deuterium, is there more deuterium in our water now, or where's that coming from? Or that's always been around?
It's always been around. There is, the universe is filled, there's deuterium everywhere. And geologically, the amount of deuterium present in drinking water over the past, I forget, billion years has increased significantly. So it has gone up and up and up for reasons I forget it. I probably read it, but it means that our physiology, we have developed these unbelievable mechanisms at the cell and the subcell level to be sure that, like, enzymes are selective. If there's a hydrogen and deuterium right next to each other, they will always pick the hydrogen. They will never pick the deuterium. I shouldn't say never. They will sometimes. If the concentration of it is too high, they will. But deuterium is just part of our drinking water. It has, it has some global variation. The lowest deuterium content of water is in Arctic ice. And in fact, when they look at longevity, there are populations that are drinking just naturally deuterium depleted water have some of the longest lifespans. And so, yeah, deuterium is just sort of a part of nature. You can buy deuterium depleted water. It's a very industrial process to produce. There are, I'm sure, YouTube videos about how to make it in your kitchen, and that's not going to happen.
Right.
It's a really intensive process because you have to separate out isotopes, and that's not exactly what you do with a Brita filter or something.
Yeah.
But you can buy deuterium depleted water and drink it. And in fact, there are many studies published on deuterium depleted water as used in the context of cancer therapy, but also diabetes and other kinds of diseases. And our thinking on this, I mean, Stephanie and we were in the process of writing a book on this topic, and then I think I mentioned already, we had to drop it and write about the vaccinations.
Yeah.
But our thinking is that really deuterium trafficking is about as fundamental to health and disease as you get. Like it even gets more fundamental than focusing on repairing the mitochondria, because it's if you haven't controlled the deuterium process and the trafficking of deuterium in the cell, then mitochondria can't function if you're letting any deuterium come through.
Wow.
So yeah.
Okay. Well, and I'm wondering, does that lead into then when we talk about sulfur metabolism? So that's really around the exclusionary zone, the exclusion zone around a cell organelles setting up a battery and a charge, which is sulfur's really main gig, is setting that up in the body. So then looking at sulfur metabolism and what goes wrong with it, like why are we seeing an uptick of dysregulation of this nutrient in our bodies? So how does it go?
Yeah, no, great. Yeah, that's so sulfur sulfur problems are a sign of the times. We all know if you go to any health food store and you pick up a detox product, or a heavy metal chelation, something, it's got a bunch of sulfur in there. That's what sulfur does. It helps us detoxify. It binds to metals, it binds to solvents, it binds to things, which is great if it's in the liver doing sulfation, because that's where detoxification happens. It's not great if it's in the connective tissue, or if it's on the surface of a cell, where that sulfur is supposed to be doing something else. It's not supposed to be binding metals out there, but it does. And if it does, that means that, so if you have this distributed negative charge over the surface of a cell that is being supplied by this forest of proteoglycans that are like these trees standing on the cell surface with negative charge all over them, and water falls into place all around the branches. And then you take something like mercury with a great big charge, positive charge, and you bring it into that environment. The sulfur is there, so it can still, it will still grab a hold. But now it has inserted this, it's like a bomb that goes off in this ocean of negative charge. We've now landed this big positive charge, and the water in the local area is going to be disrupted. And when you disrupt that water, it has all the consequences, not only about deuterium that I mentioned, but it also impacts ion diffusion. And I mean, it has an enormous impact on cellular function when the water structure is displaced. So now we're living in a world that has so many things that that sulfur tends to bind to, and sometimes it's not, it's not supposed to be in the role of detoxification. It needs to be doing something else, but it binds.
Recruited there first. So that is super interesting. So you mentioned glyphosate, which I still cannot believe you can buy that in your local grocery store. Like, their cases have been shown it causes cancer, and we can just get it at Fred Meyer. It just baffles me. You're mentioning, I'm curious on what's going on with the coronavirus and the vaccines, because you talked about a lipid nanoparticle that's part of the vaccines. That's a positively charged information coming into the cells, correct? So so it's along this lines, and you and Stephanie are putting out some amazing questions that really need to be asked scientifically with our great experiment that's happening out there, that, I think a lot of people are getting censored. Thankfully, you guys get published and put it in the annals for all time. But tell us what's happening on that front, in particular in the sulfur world.
Yeah. So you mean, what is the relationship between the vaccines and sulfur? And this is, here's what I think is happening. So these lipid spheres that are being injected, they're cationic lipid. Nature doesn't do negative charges on lipids. That's not what it does. Lipids are positive charges. Nature does negative charges on fats. Mm-hmm. But they have, this is all synthetic stuff. And so they're injecting these positively charged lipids where we don't have any enzyme system to deal with positively charged lipids. None. So one of the ways that, it's recognized, the reason that they wanted positively charged lipids to carry these in, two significant reasons. One is that these vaccines don't have any, what we typically think of as adjuvants added. So no alum or other kind of those immune provoking things. But it's the lipid that has become the adjuvant. It does the immune provocation. So it now is part of what is used to ramp up the immune system. Yeah. Then the other lovely thing about this positive lipid is that, you want to get it over to that negative charged cell. Well, that works out great, because now, just because of the charge, it will be attracted to the cell, and so make its way over to the cell membrane. There's sulfur everywhere, all that negative charge. And so this like Hindenburg is landing in this field of negativity. This huge positive charge comes in. Once landed, so now you've disrupted all the water around in that immediate area, which is liberating deuterium. Mm-hmm. Now this blob is going to be endocytized. It just, kind of makes its way, just comes out and it dumps itself in. And so there are the pores, aquaporin, which are these pores that water filters into cells through. HDO with the 1-deuterium will move through that pore almost as easily as H2O. And so all that water that got disrupted, now there's deuterium in that's loose, and it's right there. It's on the cell surface, ready to move through into the interior of the cell. So we're loading cells with more deuterium. Then this thing is coming, you blob this thing into the interior. Now you've got this positively charged lipid on the interior, which is activating all kinds of stress signals inside the cell. Any kind of all of the water that is within the cell that should be structured, this thing is, again, it is having its effect. So
Wow.
beyond the fact that there is no, inside that cell, there are no enzymes that are going to go to work on that lipid, because it's outside of our enzyme potential.
Yeah.
So it's going to be hanging around. Who knows how? We don't know how long it hangs around.
Yeah.
But while it's there, it is contributing to this problem of the water organization, with more deuterium liberated. More of that deuterium is making its way to the mitochondria and causing mitochondrial problems, which there's a whole, lot of people already published about how really the problem with COVID and potentially with long hauler, that's all just mitochondrial damage, that if we can fix the mitochondria, which makes perfect sense if in fact we have just shoveled a bunch of deuterium over toward the mitochondria and clogged all those ATP pumps.
Yeah.
And just as a kind of a footnote, I heard Dr. Zach Bush talk and say that he had treated some patients using deuterium depleted water and found that it was actually quite dramatic how quickly they recovered. And that was back before anybody knew about ivermectin or anything.
Uh-huh.
So my suspicion, I got a case of deuterium depleted water at home, and if I were to start to get symptomatic, I'd be drinking that water.
So even with just getting the natural coronavirus, so not just from vaccination.
Yeah, I think, yes, an actual infection, which I think is, symptomatically is less, much more symptomatic in terms of, not everybody who gets a vaccination feels miserable for 2 weeks. Some do, but not everybody does. But the damage, the underlying damage is minuscule, I think, in relation to the potential damage that might be coming up with the vaccinations. So the spike protein will have, some of these effects on physiology, but nothing to the extent of the vaccinations. The mRNA being used in the vaccinations is so modified. It's just unbelievable, the modifications that they did to it. It has not in any way like the spike protein mRNA of the actual virus.
Got it. Wow. Okay, so that is very interesting. And timely, and I want to get back into the book. So we're coming down the end of the show, and so I've got your contact info on the show notes. I wonder if you could lay out, okay, Dr. Greg, what do I do now? I have this sulfur metabolism, of course, getting support with folks that have been through it, that can guide you through makes the most sense to get to Wellville, let's say. And just to give for instance, maybe people don't know what high sulfur foods are.
Well, yeah. So, and kind of one of the peculiarities is that the highest dietary source of sulfur for people that eat meat is meat products. Mm-hmm. But our experience is that meat products are very rarely triggering of sulfur symptoms. Now, it's not universally true. Some people, it does seem to be, but in general, I don't. So we have people reduce meat intake in the early days of the protocol, and that's really just to lower the overall load of sulfur coming in. And then we have the reintroduction process, and so, garlic, onions, kale, eggs, broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, wine, those are the biggies. And there are, obviously others. So they're the reactive sulfur foods that are usually among those that I just named. And then there's just Maria's put together an awesome kind of a protocol that, in addition to the reactive foods, there are other foods, just so that we lower the amount of sulfur coming in while we're doing this other work of Epsom salt baths. And I have people do contrast showering, essentially hydrotherapy in the shower, just for the autonomic effect of that. Or ground, people, it's not really the time anymore, but grounding I think is great. I mean, all those electrons that flow into the body by grounding, I mean, those electrons are the negative charge that is needed for the whole system to work. And then, various nutrients, molybdenum and I mean, it's different ones for different people, maybe B12, butyrate, there's a lot of different possibilities of how we're trying to keep people supported as they're going through the process.
Depending on which pathway of the sulfur metabolism.
Yeah, you just kind of, it's like, And so we get the program, Maria gets them oriented to the diet, and I get them on the supplements and the home therapies, and we get them working on autonomic nervous system stuff, because pretty much anybody who's had chronic anything has some level of autonomic dysregulation. And so we're doing, various kinds of therapies to try to get that system taken care of. And frankly, I think a lot of the reasons for treatment failure in all of medicine, but in the naturopathic world as well, is failure to really address that autonomic piece. And that you can do everything else right, but if you've got a sympathetic dominant state, it's really hard you can't, get that fixed.
What's your favorite technique on regulating autonomic nervous system? I mean, you went through a whole list there of the grounding and the contrast showers, the Epsom salt baths. You have a favorite?
Yeah, well, actually, the one that I'm probably making the most use of now is a system called SSP, Safe and Sound Protocol. And that is, so I'll try to make this short. Stephen Porges, who developed what's called the polyvagal theory, which is this vagus nerve dysregulation and dorsal vagal and all that. So Safe and Sound Protocol is it's a set of audio files that people listen to that are filtered at very specific frequencies. And using the 8th cranial nerve, it is adjusting the tone of the vagus nerve. And through a series of sessions of listening to these files, it changes the autonomic tone that people have. And so that's a system that Maria went through the kind of the certification process for that. And so people meet with her, and she is able to kind of orient people and give them access to the audio files and lead them through this whole program. So that I use that a lot, and that's been a good addition, in addition to the other kinds of stuff.
Sure, that's awesome. I figured you'd have something up your sleeve over there.
Yeah,
love it. Okay, and so the program protocol on, there's the foods, there's the specific nutrients, depending on really individualizing the program for folks. How long? I mean, I want to give some people some hope. How long is this process? I know you can't just say, well, it's 2 weeks and that's it. But overall, what have you found?
Yeah, generally, so we do the hard protocol for 2 weeks. And then people do reintroductions, and we find out what their trigger foods are. And then there's the process of bringing the rest of the foods back in while we're keeping everybody supported. So they're taking a particular Mozyme Forte, is the molybdenum that everybody takes. They have to keep doing Epsom salt baths, because that's a very important way that you bring sulfate into the body without it going down the tube, so it gets in through the skin. So we keep people supported with SSP and all of the things, and ultimately get their diet expanded out as much as we can. And then it's like you get through those initial phases, and then that's when there's no more, I can't really say any more general about it, because it becomes so specific on individual people, because now you're getting into their other things that that are really keeping them from making the full progress. And that's, sometimes you got to look at the hormones and, adrenal or pituitary or whatever. And sometimes, oh, this looks like a toxicity issue, or this looks like they just need just mitochondria therapies or whatever. Like it becomes much more individualized as people kind of march their way out of this process.
Got it. And so like how long, what does that?
Oh yeah. How long? It is absolutely all over the place. So some people can be, some people, I'm still working with them trying to get their diet expanded now, 8 months to a year later of just trying to, because it's no longer about sulfur at that point. It's about all the other things that are keeping them from making the progress. So the actual sulfur problems are usually done, you're beyond that point by, I'd say, 6 months. And then you're dealing with the other things that are preventing their body from getting back to base.
Perfect. Any last parting words? This has been fascinating discussion, and we rambled through it really well.
Parting words. I hate those things. I feel like I should have words of wisdom or something, but I got nothing.
Fair enough. Everybody, this is Dr. Greg Nigh, his book, The Devil in the Garlic. He lays it all out in there. You're also welcome. Sorry, I got the glare going. You can go onto his website, immersionhealthpdx.com. I've got that in the show notes. Dr. Nigh, thank you for coming on. What's the Health? Folks, if you got anything out of today's show, go out there, share the show, please, with 2 friends, family members that could benefit from this. Also, go out, give us a 5-star review on your favorite platform. Those make a difference, and tell them why you like the show. This is the Contact Talk Radio. We are here Tuesdays from 2 to 3 Pacific time. See you next week.